Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Kelly Beard, Content Specialist for Maryland Realtors, and I want to welcome you all to our Economic Forecast webinar. Our CEO, Chuck Caskey, is our host, and he will then hand it over to Chief NAR Economist and guest, Lawrence Yoon. We do encourage your questions. We look forward to answering them. Please post questions in the Q&A box below at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We will answer your questions towards the end of the webinar. And with that, Chuck, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kelly, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to stretch it a little bit. This is what they say, stretch, if somebody has to stay on stage a little bit longer so that people can join. And so I'm seeing the numbers go up. And so we'll just give it a couple seconds more so that the numbers start to slow down a little bit. We have over 600 people registered, so we have a pretty good idea of how many would probably join. So that's slowed down a little bit. So with that, we'll get started. It's my great pleasure to introduce Lawrence Yoon. Many of you know Lawrence from his presentations either at NAR events or a state event or a local event. He's always available to us, and we very much appreciate that. And as Kelly mentioned, Lawrence is the chief economist at NAR and oversees the research group. He supervises and is responsible for a wide range of research activity for NAR, including the existing home sales statistics, affordability index, and the home buyers and sellers profile report, which, by the way, if you don't go through that, please do. If you haven't, the most recent buyers and sellers profile report, there's a lot of really good information there. So I highly recommend that. And as you know, he regularly provides commentary on real estate market trends and is always accommodating to state and local realtor associations across the country, and again, for which we are extremely grateful. Dr. Yoon received his undergraduate degree from Purdue University and earned his PhD from our own University of Maryland, College Park. Dr. Yoon, thank you very much for coming.
Great. Thank you, Chuck, for the introduction and the invitation. So I am in Washington, D.C. For some of you who may know where our National Association of Realtors building is, it's 2 blocks from the U.S. Capitol. Coming into office today, it was light traffic, I would say. If you look at the foot traffic on the street, as I look out the window, it is also light. It's been like that actually, not only today, but pretty much the past 3-4 years ever since COVID. And we know the reason, hybrid work model situation. We know that President Trump, Elon Musk has said, come into office for federal government employees. At least so far, it doesn't appear to be the case. So I'm not sure exact protocol process, the head of the agency beginning to require, or maybe it requires 2 weeks notice, whatever it is. And then we also have the big announcement this week about the buyout to say for some federal government employees, which is important in Montgomery County, Prince George's County, certainly in the Maryland inner counties in Virginia, along with DC, where some federal government employees, whether or not they take that buyout and then leave the area, which would also have some consequence to the real estate market. So a lot of developments, a lot of unknowns, but let's try to assess where we are likely to go. So I'm going to put the PowerPoint slide onto the screen, and then we will go from there. So hold 1 second as I find the slide and put it onto the screen. So you do see it, and this PowerPoint will be sent to Maryland Realtors so that those who want to retrieve it for a little extra detailed examination on a couple of charts, you are most welcome to peruse it. So let's go. You may have heard in the media last week that home sales was the lowest in 30 years. factually correct. You look at the red bar. This is realtors' home sales or existing home sales that has taken place. The blue is for the home builders. In fact, home builders squeaked out 2 straight years of gain. If you were to focus only on the blue, home builders made gains. But of course, it's the realtors in the red who do the bulk of the sales, and it is still the case that the large market share of home sales are existing home. That is to say, established neighborhood, the place where you jog in the evening or go for a walk, and you are looking for those for sale signs and how many people would be willing to conduct transactions. It's not in the new subdivision with the construction cranes and so forth. So the red is dominant compared to the blue, and the red has seen existing home sales 30-year low. In fact, last year looks like a 30-year low. So 2023, 2024, 2 consecutive years of low activity. The graph begins from 2019, before COVID. Then in 2020, we did have a lockdown, but after the lockdown, people saw low interest rate and they wanted to buy home. Furthermore, you did not have to come into office. So people said, I need that extra bedroom to turn it into office. So people are shopping around for a little larger size home. 2021, booming. Then when the Federal Reserve began to raise interest rates, sales decline, and that's where we are at 30-year low in terms of home sales activity. If we look at Maryland specifically, Chuck and his staff at Maryland Realtors do a very good job in providing the information that you need. So in Maryland, actually did a little better compared to the rest of the country. Unit sales increased 1.5%. Nationwide, sales fell 1%. So you can say, relatively speaking, Maryland did a little better than the rest of the country. Price increase for the country, 4.7% growth, Maryland 5.8% growth, little faster price appreciation. So you combine the price increase along with the unit sale, the business dollar volume would have risen about 7% in Maryland last year. We are in an entrepreneurial business, and therefore not everyone gets equal percentage gains. Some people, when I walk the hallways at some real estate conference, I show the worst home sales in 30 years. And they come up to me, tap me on the shoulder and say, guess what? I had my best year ever. And that doesn't surprise me because we know about 80-20 rule or 90-10 rule, essentially 20% of the realtors doing 80% of the business. So some realtors constantly thrive even in a difficult environment. But the overall Maryland dollar volume revenue would have increased based on small gain in unit sales along with the price gain. Now the price gain from this past year, about 5% in Maryland. But if you look what has happened in the past 4 years, from pre-COVID, first quarter 2020 to the most recent, and price gains are sizable. In Maryland, you go to the right-hand side, Eastern Coast states are geographically small, so I put that table on the right, and that red arrow, which is pointing towards Maryland, 41% price gain for a typical homeowner in Maryland over this 4-year time span. These are sizable gain in such a short period of time. What this means is that your past clients are all happy. It's not a foreclosure crisis situation. The people that you helped buy and sell homes in the past, they are super happy with your service. In fact, we get a survey result. We survey recent home buyers, recent home sellers to ask a variety of questions. Was coming up with down payment difficult? Or what did you do to come up with a down payment? What type of home are you looking at? All those questions. And towards the end, we asked the question about satisfaction with their realtor. And no surprise, 80%, 90% of recent home buyers and recent home sellers said, I would work with my realtor again for the next transaction. I would recommend my family members, business colleague to my realtor. not other realtor, but to my realtor, indicating a very high satisfaction rate across the country. So note that your clients, for the most part, are in a good mood, not only the satisfaction, but in terms of the wealth gain that has occurred. But Maryland, even with a 41% price increase, compared to other states, it is slightly below national average, at least across this 4-year time span. Dark color states are doing even better than Maryland. Carolinas, Florida, few markets in Rocky Mountain. And guess what? Who is number one? State of Maine at 72% price gain in state of Maine. I will go into, Maine is not Maryland, but I will go into hypothesis why Maine really boomed during that period. So home prices have increased. So in the aggregate, according to the Federal Reserve, the household equity in real estate, essentially for property owners across the country, how much of a gain? Record high situation. In the middle of the graph, you see that dip. That dip is related to the foreclosure crisis back in 2009, 2010, 2011. We remember those terrible, difficult circumstances. And ever since then, realtors have been advocating. And furthermore, due to the realtors' advocacy position, Congress passed the legislation President signed. I think the bill was labeled as Ability to Repay Act. Only people who's going to get a mortgage is you have to show your income. You don't show your income, you're not going to get a mortgage. And also, people who are borrowing money, you have to stay within budget. You cannot borrow way excessive amount because we had that foreclosure crisis and realtors said we never want to see that again. So legislation was passed. But right now, homeowners doing very, very well. And furthermore, in our survey of realtors, roughly 1/3 of realtors have investment property or second home property. And to the degree that they have investment second home property, they're also gaining this amount in terms of equity situation. $1 trillion gains are large figures. Hard to put our fingers around it. So to make it a little more manageable, I put it for a typical homeowner and typical renter. Now, this is a nationwide figure. It's data from the Federal Reserve. Maybe you have seen it before, or maybe you understand the concept, but you don't know the precise figure. If there is one chart that you would want to use in your presentation, especially with the first-time buyers, because with a new buyer agency form, you have to sign all the document. Buyers will ask this question, that question, many questions. But at some point, you have to pull out this chart. In order to gain wealth in America, accumulate wealth in America, you have to own a piece of America. Blue is showing homeowners, typical homeowners, wealth at $396,000 as of 2022, official data from the Federal Reserve. Renters, bare minimal, slight money in the bank, their automobile, and that's about it. So homeowners build wealth. Now, this does include 401k, retirement funds, and so forth, things like this. But for most middle-class families, bulk of this blue bar, large portion of this blue wealth is from homeownership. It's housing wealth that is contributing. 2024 data is not available, but I can make a reasonable guess that homeowners' wealth further increase because price increase continue throughout America, and in Maryland, another 5% gain would have pushed into this condition. I also want to mention that in Washington, last week, we had about 400 realtors come into town to discuss various committee about policy and what to request from Congress or share information with Congress. And one of the things that we are doing on behalf of your clients is to say that capital gains exemption from a sellable home. We know about $250,000 exemption for a single individual, $500,000 for a married couple. We all know that. Buy a home, and when you make the sale, you don't have to pay a tax. Or that's what we used to say. But now home prices rising so much that some or I should say more and more homeowners in Maryland are getting ensnared in this capital gains tax. The figure of $250,000, $500,000 has not been changed for almost 30 years. And we are only requesting Congress, can you index to inflation? Just index to inflation. Go to the past year, just index to inflation. You know, price of eggs was much cheaper 30 years ago. Price of movie tickets were much cheaper. Well, the capital gains exemption amount, it has not been changed for 30 years. Can we simply index to inflation? And I did some calculation, and if we index to inflation, the new exemption amount would be essentially $500,000 for a single individual and almost $1 million for a married couple. So more homeowners in Maryland will feel comfortable listing their property knowing there would not be a tax implication. So we are sharing this information with members of Congress. We are sharing this information with the Trump administration, and we want to make some movement on it so that we get more listing out in the marketplace condition. So first, be a homeowner to gain wealth. Second, we are working to make sure that this wealth belongs to the homeowner when they sell their home. So lifting the capital gains. Also, looking at the price movement. So Maryland Association show price gain of 5%, but that's based on all home sales. What this chart shows is a more fancy statistical modeling looking at the same property, same quality, and price adjustment. And it shows the price gain in Maryland of roughly 4.9%. And this, I think, is about the national average. But interesting trend is that we are seeing faster price appreciation in middle America, like the Illinois, Michigan, Kentucky. These are affordable markets. So what this is indicating is that maybe some Americans are getting tapped out on affordability, and they are they're looking for home purchase in more affordable markets, and therefore pushing up prices in more affordable markets. So at least in the most recent year, we are seeing some pattern of people wanting to go to more affordable regions. New York is very affordable outside of New York City. So you look at Buffalo, you look at Syracuse, places, one of the most affordable regions of the country, and the price gains are primarily coming from more affordable regions of the country. Let's look at the timeline of price changes that has happened in some parts of Maryland. So I put 4 graphs. One is Baltimore metropolitan area covering, I think Howard County is part of Baltimore metro market, you know, certainly Baltimore County, Baltimore City, and then Frederick, Rockville region, Hagerstown, and rural Maryland. So areas where it's not really part of the metropolitan area. It doesn't matter which is which. What you notice is that all 4 areas, which appears distinctly be different, but they move almost similarly. A very, very similar pattern, all 4 markets. So independent of how you want to view it, moving similarly, but also note 2005, those were artificial price appreciation, subprime lending, no income documentation, and then we had a crash, foreclosure crisis. But we are past that, and right now we don't have prices turning negative. In fact, foreclosure crises currently are at historically low levels because of that legislation, ability to repay act, and therefore people cannot overstretch. Prices are no longer spiking. Prices are still rising, but in a much more manageable way now than before. Home ownership rate in the meantime is showing, I guess, about 70%, 68%, not a real big movement from one year to the next. So the swing in this data is really from about 72%, which you may say is a little artificial, but 70% I think is probably the norm in the Maryland, especially considering the suburban counties, Montgomery County, Prince George's County, and not really in the city because suburban counties tends to have a higher home ownership rate. So let's look at what's happening related to home sales in recent months. So annually, the worst in 30 years. But what about recent months? Well, we are beginning to see little light appearing. After 3 straight years of decline in home sales, home sales popped higher in October, November, and December. You see the momentum building. This is compared to 1 year ago. So there's no, it's not a proper comparison for winter home sales with spring. So you want to compare October with October, November with November, and so forth. And we are seeing some positive lights beginning to pop out after 3 straight years. So the annual figure is low, but as we are going into 2025, the final 3 months showing good, and maybe this momentum will continue to show. So why is the sales beginning to rise? Has the mortgage rate fallen? And answer is no. Has the prices fallen? No, prices have not fallen. So why is the sales beginning to rise? Because we are beginning to see more inventory choices. Consumers are getting more options, and they are aware of it. So in the past, we know about the frenzy activity 3 years ago. Property showed up, it was taken away within a day or two. Frenzy, multiple offers. Well, today, homes are lingering in the market for a longer period, giving buyers a little more breathing room. They don't have to make quick decision. They're giving them a little more breathing room. And even with mortgage rate being what it is, we are seeing more transaction because inventory is beginning to appear. Even though we are seeing increase in inventory, let's still put it in the proper perspective. So let me go back. This is change in inventory from 1 year ago. So we are seeing more inventory now than before, but nationwide, we still have very low inventory, even with recent inventory growth. So historically, I would say we need another 30%, 40% boost in inventory just to get back to sort of more normal level. That peak in home inventory 2007-8, those are foreclosures coming onto the market during that time. But if you want to look at year 2000 or say year 2017, 2018, you see today's inventory is still about 30%, 40% below normal. Now, what I found most interesting about Maryland is the following. Nationwide, we are seeing more inventory. But look at the red box right in the center top. Active inventory in Maryland is actually lower. So this is unusual. Rest of the country seeing more inventory, but Maryland far fewer inventory. Now, this is the reason why the prices are still rising above national average. But I'm surprised. Even with fewer inventory, there's more transaction occurring in Maryland, which is imply there are eager buyers on the, sitting on the fence, ready to jump in if the right property comes onto the market at the right price. Pending contracts a little on the right, showing, the decent increase condition. So this is a December data. So this is not an annual. This is just looking at the month of December. But the months of inventory, 1.6 in December. This is one of the lowest in the country. So it is a very, very tight market in Maryland, according to this data. So the median days on the market nationwide is a little over a month, like 35 days. But as you can see in Maryland, 17 days. Things are moving very, very fast from the time of listing until ratified contracts. So I found it a little interesting that in Maryland, that inventory is still tight, yet transactions are still happening. Now, regarding future inventory, we hear so much about lock-in effect. People have 3% mortgage rate and they say, oh, I will never give up my 3% mortgage rate. The home that I am in, I will never sell it. So that's what we constantly hear. But did you know that among 88 million homeowners across the country, that 35 million, the largest slice of the pie, in the blue, 35 million have no mortgages. They're not locked in. They can move at any time. Maybe trading down, maybe different residence, whatever they want to do, they are not locked in. People who are truly locked in is the color, the peach color part. So towards the bottom, they have mortgage rate locked in at less than 3%. So you may say they are truly locked in, unless there is a major life changes. Maybe they found a new job at different county and they cannot do the commute. Therefore, they need to sell their house and move on. Or maybe they have an additional child in the family or 2 children in the family over the past 4 years, and the house is too small. They have to give up their 3% mortgage rate for something larger. Or maybe some retirees. And we know, this week's announcement where some federal employees, I don't know, 1%, 2%, 10%, may take the buyout offer and begin to say, I want to trade down. Now I got my buyout from the federal government. Who knows? So even with the interest rate, if there are significant life-changing events, people will give up their low interest rate and move on to the next home. So what I want to emphasize is that, yes, we did have a lock-in effect. That was very strong a couple of years ago, but with the passage of time, it becomes less strong, because with passage of time means more accumulated life-changing events. So people will give up their low interest rate for the next home that better fits their circumstance. Sons and daughters inherit a property because their grandparents had passed away. What are they going to do? Well, they want to cash out, put the home on the market, get the proceed, let's divide it up. Again, additional inventory with the passage of time. So I believe that the low point on inventory is pretty much over. Maryland is not showing that yet. Rest of the country is showing it, but I think Maryland will also soon show that you will begin to see more inventory, and more inventory appears to lead to more home sales. Historically, home sales depended on two factors: jobs and mortgage rates. Common sense: more job, more home sales; lower mortgage rate, more home sales. Common sense. But what appears to be very unique factor in this real estate cycle is inventory availability. If there is more inventory, it seems like it facilitates more home sales. So new factor at play is inventory. But let me discuss jobs and mortgage rate, since these two are very important historically. So let's turn to job. And this is where Maryland has been underperforming. So how many job addition from pre-COVID to most recently available data? When you see green, they are superstars, huge job addition. Dark blue is above national average. Light blue below national average. Maryland, go to the sidebar, the blue arrow, it added only 0.8% more jobs. Is one of the worst performing states in terms of job additions. Housing market is holding on nicely, but in terms of job addition, one of the worst. Only worse area is District of Columbia. I mean, District of Columbia is not a state, but it's certainly part of the United States. And they were down 2.8%. And I know why. All those lunch shop, the restaurant, they're shut down with the federal government employees not coming in. All that, I don't see it anymore. But I thought it used to be a very thriving business, but they had to shut down because everything is calmer in DC. Now, with anticipated more workers coming back to office, maybe things will change, but DC has been one of the few in the negative territory. Maryland not really lighting up at less than 1% job addition. So let's compare Maryland and the total US jobs here. So total US job condition is not a straight line. There's some fluctuation, but it's record high. One may say that American economy is the strongest in the worldwide. Germany is in a recession, France barely hitting job, Britain barely hitting job, China is a little dicey, Japan is on their long-term stagnation. So relatively speaking, you may say America's economy is the best in the world. I mean, Maryland has participated a little of that, but American economy very, very solid, unemployment rate super low, which raises the question: what happens if there's so much deportation of people who are working in the industry, construction, maybe working at a hotel, maybe working in a restaurant in the back, washing dishes and such? So what happens if it is rounded up? Are we going to have intensified unemployment rate? Now, Trump administration, it seems like they want to first phase anyone with criminal record, deport. And I think that's something very welcoming news, make Americans safer. We don't like crime. But what about the second phase and third phase? If it can be combined with work visa, temporary work visa, say a construction company said, look, we need 30 more workers. I cannot recruit in America or nobody's applying. well, we want 30 workers coming from elsewhere, and the government approves those 30 temporary work visa. So if the deportation can be combined with work visa, then the overall impact on the labor market may be minimal. Those people who are, getting those crabs or, putting, what do you call it? Breaking down the shells and then pulling out the back fin meat of the crab meat. I'm sure there are, people who are undocumented workers in that area. But if it is combined with work permit visa, then again, the overall issue may be a muted issue. So let's see how Trump administration handle this. So, they are saying they want to remove undocumented workers, but if it's combined with temporary work visa, I think it may not have a damaging effect in terms of the labor market shortage situation. We have to just wait and see. There's much more uncertainty related to the Trump administration, and maybe this is something that President Trump actually thrives on. He thrives on uncertainty, and I think President Trump, so let's see how things develop. But let's look at Maryland. So let's look towards the end. So if you look towards the end, you see a sharp drop off. That's the lockdown. And then we are coming out of the lockdown, but as I mentioned in Maryland, very little job addition compared to pre-COVID. But if you look at the long-term horizon, it's actually decent, 14% job addition from year 2000 to all the way to 2024. So about 14% job addition. These are all accumulated potential housing demand. Now, people do not buy home in the past 2 years, but they have accumulated. They're just looking for the better opportunity in terms of lower mortgage rates and more inventory condition. So the jobs, potential housing demand is clearly there. But if you look at Washington, D.C. Metro, which is Montgomery County, Fairfax County, Virginia, Prince George's County, and I think even St. Mary's County is included in this. I'm not sure. But if you look at the broad metro market, including DC, what one finds is that there's barely ever a recession. People say Washington is a recession-proof city. So this chart pretty much shows that. While Maryland, it tends to go into cycle, and the rest of the country goes into a much bigger cycle. So to this extent, the graph clearly shows DC has been fairly recession-proof economy other than post-COVID. The hybrid work model, people not coming into office, all that part is contributing. But the big change is how much of buyout by the federal government employees and also Elon Musk tasked with identifying wasteful government spending, slash it away. Well, first, that's a good thing. But sometimes in the process, they may shave away not only the fat, but they may shave away the muscle and the bone. So we need to make sure it does not harm some of the services that people rely on. But this graph shows in the past, DC has been fairly recession-proof in that regard. So job market in Maryland is adding accumulated housing demand. If the conditions are right, people will buy. Second important factor is mortgage rates. So orange line is what you care about, average 30-year fixed rate mortgage. Blue is what the Federal Reserve control, and in fact is a short-term interest rate for the banking system. So the blue is not for you and me, it's for the banking system. And what I put here is what happened to mortgage rate in the past year. So it's been around 6.5%, 7%. Then in the red bar, red line, September, Federal Reserve cut interest rates and cut interest rate in November and December. But guess what? Mortgage rate has risen. One indication of this is that Federal Reserve does not control mortgage rate. So we have to put it into our mindset. Federal Reserve does not control mortgage rates. But in the past, Federal Reserve generally do move mortgage rate in the right way. So look at this. So you see from 2019, then we had COVID, blue line went to 0, mortgage rate went to under 3%. Then when the Federal Reserve began to raise interest rate, mortgage rate climbed. Now that the Federal Reserve is cutting interest rate, only recently it's not behaving as it should. But I think the Federal Reserve will do 2 or 3 more rate of round cuts this year, and mortgage rate will slide down somewhat. Not greatly, but slide down from current 7% to a new normal of 6 to 6.5%. I think that will be the new normal. It will not go back to what it was under first term of President Trump. Under first Trump presidency, did you know that mortgage rate pretty much were at 4% and 5%? Let me repeat, 4% mortgage rate, 5% mortgage rate. Some of you are salivating if we could get to that level. President Trump, being President Trump, I think 2 days ago, said, I want the interest rate to be down. I want mortgage rates to go down. So that's what he was saying. Well, mortgage rate, I don't think we'll go back down to 4% or 5%. I think the 6% is about where we will get. And the key reason for that is the following. It is a different backdrop. The first blue arrow shows the national debt picture when President Trump entered the White House in 2017. Second blue arrow is what he is facing today. It has risen by $16 trillion in national debt. So much government borrowing means is crowding out private capital or eating up private capital. So government borrows, there's less private capital, including mortgage money that could be lent out. And that less mortgage money is being reflected in the mortgage rate. And that's why mortgage rate cannot go to 4%, 5%, in my view. So new normal anticipate to be about 6%, unless somehow national debt picture can be addressed. It seems like Elon Musk, and Vivek Ramaswamy, they are tasked to reduce the budget deficit by reducing government spending. And another thing that President Trump is relying on is economic growth. And with more growth, you can reduce the budget deficit. Somewhat different from what Vice President Harris has suggested, because Vice President Harris, wanted to raise tax rates and hire more IRS agents to address the budget deficit. So a little different way of trying to address budget deficit. But given that it is so high, mortgage rate cannot go to 4%, 5% condition. So let me wrap it up by going to the forecast. So this is the bright MLS that all of you are looking at. So when I see bright MLS, for Baltimore metro market and DC metro market, I'm just looking at the two big market condition. So what we are finding is active listing, not about the new listings. New listings are below 1 year ago, but the active listings are beginning to be a little more. So consumers have more choices. So maybe, we will get a little turn in the home buying activity, certainly, more choices for the consumers. So given that, the way I am forecasting is for nationwide home sales to increase 9% this year and 13% next year. Do not take the number too seriously. Some people say, 2 years from now, they pull out this chart and say, Lawrence Yun said 9%, but the reality was actually 20%, or the reality was only 2%. Don't take so seriously regarding the number. It's like trying to forecast how much snow based on the condition. Well, the condition is saying there will be a snow. The reality is we have to wait and see. The condition for the housing market is saying more jobs, slightly lower mortgage rates, more inventory. All this condition is saying more home sales. Now, the table that you see is nationwide. I don't do a state-by-state forecast, but any variation will be related to more job market situation and inventory. As mentioned, Maryland is a little sluggish on job creation, but there is potential for sudden surge in inventory from federal government buyout situation. Remain a little uncertain, so let's wait and see. But the mortgage rate will be behaving a little better. Also, because of more inventory, price growth would not be sharp. It will be more modest price growth and new normal mortgage rate of around 6%. Final chart is the following, something that the realtors who are very involved with committee, very involved with Maryland realtors in advocating at Annapolis, or some people who are at the national level, advocating at the national level, to say that housing market is important for the economy. And much of the economic multiplier is local. When there is a home sale, mortgage originators gets income, realtors get income, home builders get income, the painting service gets income, lawn care service, furniture shops. Then people have income, they go to the restaurants, spend more to the local economy. So multiplier impact is largely domestic. So from this addition, what we find is that there's a sizable impact to the local economy from home sales. Home sales has been quite sluggish this past couple of years, but with anticipated increase in home sales, I think the economy is definitely in a good position. So thank you very much for allowing me to share some of my thoughts with you all. Now I'm going to turn it back over to the CEO, Chuck Caskey, for about 10 minutes of Q&A.
Thank you very much, Lawrence. I really appreciate the national perspective because we track Maryland numbers but we sometimes don't get to see how Maryland fits in with the national picture. So I found that part of the presentation really illuminating. I just want to say, when you separate the meat from the crab, it's called picking. So
Okay.
pick a crab, okay? So, and which is interesting because we talked about immigration and the summer work that our watermen hire to pick the crabs. A lot of those are temporary workers, and there is a visa for that, kind of like the H-1B visa. And we don't have time for that conversation, of course, but we do know that there is going to have to be a reckoning with our immigration process, our immigration system, our immigration enforcement, and the need for workers, as you alluded to, that for jobs that are difficult for employers to fill with U.S. citizens. So whether there's an immigration solution to that, well, there are solutions. It's just a matter, I think, of the will, politically, to bring those to the fore. But the other thing, and we do have a question I'll get to, I think your discussion on interest rates is fascinating. We know it gets complicated. Interest rates, of course, are much more tied to the bond market, hence the relationship between the government borrowing and mortgage interest rates. Well, I've been saying that we need to break that cycle, that lock-in effect, because historically, from 1971 to 2024, at least, the average mortgage rate was 7.75%. And so we are below the historic average on interest rates. And I think part of our messaging has to be, look, if it's a good time for you to buy or sell, and move, it's a good time. Don't wait around. Like we teach, don't try to time the stock market because you lose out. So, I think that's part of our messaging. Is that fair to say?
Oh, absolutely. When I showed you at the very beginning about the wealth difference between homeowners and renters,
Right.
well, many of the homeowners first bought their home when the mortgage rates were 12% or 8%, 10%. But independent of when they enter, they're in that blue big wealth gain. While renters, we know they're just spinning their wheels, and statistics show that.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that's our messaging, right? I mean, when we going out and listing and working with buyers, especially, or even prospective buyers, we need to tell them, don't sit this out because you're missing out. So I do have an entire presentation on commercial real estate. And so I don't know if there are any very top line kind of summary, or do you want to just say tune in to your commercial real estate presentation? But I don't want to put you on the spot because we don't have that kind of time. But any one or two sentence top line comments on the commercial sector, I think.
Yeah, just quickly, is that commercial real estate loans are not 30 years. It is for 5 years, 7 years.
Sure.
People who took it out, now it's time to refinance. But now refinancing at higher interest rate, it makes it very difficult. So there's many local banks doing a pretend and lend. Now that doesn't sound good, But what that pretend and lend is, just buy extra time because the economy is good, which means the rents will be rising, occupancy will steadily fill in, maybe even the office space demand will return. And then with time, interest rate will be a little bit lower, which means that using technical term in commercial real estate, cap rate can go down. And that will really begin to revive some of the commercial real estate market. So buy a little time for interest rates to come down, for things to get better.
We're still talking about adaptive reuse too. So we do know that a lot of parts of the country are still seeing unutilized or underutilized commercial spaces. So I still think that's a conversation we should be having. One of the questions is about the impact. It's about $137,000 per home sale. I can answer that, but you can also, what does that cover? The impact of a home sale, and we pegged that at 137,000. What are the components of that impact?
So we look at first immediate, during the closing table,
Right.
title insurance, get some, the compensation for the work they provided, the real estate. And then you have the typical additional spending related to home preparation, whether it's a
Right.
lawn care, painting, buying of furniture, new appliances. And then there's the multiplier, which the economists always say, people earn income and they go out and shop. And the big component is what we call, it induces new home construction. So when there is a more existing home sales, it induces new home sales. Generally, it's about 10-to-1 ratio. So we prorate it essentially to say, 10% of the new home price addition to that.
Yeah, that multiplier is really the key, right? Yeah. Indexing capital gains. Yeah. So there's a really good advocacy. There's a great argument for indexing capital gains. What are the prospects of that?
So regarding the prospect, I'm not the right person because we have our advocacy team constantly talking
Right.
with the members of Congress, and we are certainly sharing this information with members of Congress. And of the 535 elected officials in Congress, I believe 530 have a realtor attached to it. What that means is that we were able to identify a realtor who happens to know that member of Congress, whether they were college buddies or whether I remember one realtor who said, "Oh, this congressperson, I used to babysit with the,
Yeah, right,
all
right,
that
right,
part."
right.
So they have fairly good connection to it, and we
Yeah.
just share that information. So in terms of information sharing, many members of Congress are aware of this capital gains lifting, which realtors desire. And we are part of that democratic process, sharing our information. So we are there just pounding this information to Congress. And it seems like President Trump is also somewhat receptive to this idea. So let's see how it goes.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. And I would recommend that we all pay very close attention when we get an advocacy update from NAR. That's one of the key issues in our advocacy, as Lawrence mentioned, from the advocacy team. So this next one is about printing money. I just started, I don't mean I take too much time, but I was just doing a lot of reading on modern monetary theory that talks about the money supply and its relationship to the national debt and inflation. And so we don't have the kind of time. The question is does monetary policy, including the money supply, contribute to artificially inflated home values? We don't have that kind of time. There is not a yes or no answer to that, is there?
Actually, let me put it a little different spin on that,
Okay.
which is to say that you saw the printing of the money, huge national debt picture. Anytime you see a country in this situation, their currency collapses.
Yeah,
But guess what? US dollar is super strong. I mean, it is
exactly.
super strong. But what this is indicating is that other countries' financial mess is even worse than America. Canada, France, I mean, it's even worse than America. China is even worse than America regarding national debt. So what people are doing is now they're buying gold and they're buying cryptocurrency as an alternative to paper currency. And in the past, people purchase real estate as an alternative to paper currency. So the way I would view it is the following. We saw a little spike in home prices in 2022, but those were due to supply and demand, low interest rate. We did not get this additional boost in real estate prices from alternative to currency aspect, which the cryptocurrency and the gold prices are currently getting. But I wonder whether at some point real estate will also be viewed as alternative to paper currency.
Okay, interesting. That probably the person who wrote that might not be might not be satisfied with that answer. It's a very, very complicated question. So can we get a printable summary? Yeah, we said we will share the slides. Lawrence is very generous in sharing what he has put together, and so we will get those and distribute the slides. Printable summary of the comments is in the slides, really. So all that information is there. And the last question is rentals. We don't spend a lot of time forecasting rentals, but we know that rents are increasing. We know that, and increase in rents kind of squeeze people's ability to save up for the home. So, do we have any insight? And I know you don't just in Maryland, but even more nationally, are we still seeing rental rates increasing at a rate that really does provide an impediment to getting that down payment and closing costs for the path to home ownership?
For the sake of time, I have to make this the last question.
Sure, no, it
So
was, yeah,
regarding
absolutely.
the rents have actually increased faster than consumer price
Right,
inflation. So consumer
right.
price inflation about 25%, 28%. Rents nationwide has increased by 35, 40%. Home price is a little faster. Of course, higher rents means the more difficult to save up for down payment. And also we know that some people are really stressed. People are not in a fortunate circumstances to be an owner, so they are renters temporarily, hopefully temporarily, not a permanent case. But we should also remember that, due to the realtors during the COVID lockdown, there was a rental subsidy for the renters. We said it should not be a policy where renters do not pay and the property owners are left holding the bag. That's not fair. So realtors, due to the advocacy, make sure that the Congress approved rental subsidies so that property owners will be able to cover the rent or collect the rent, even if the renters did not have that money available. So again, get engaged with Maryland Realtors, get engaged with local association, with NAR to assure that we have the fairness in addressing many of the real estate issues.
That's a great way to wrap it up. Lawrence, as always, we so much value your time and appreciate your availability to us. So for everybody who was on, thank you very much. And the slides will be available and we'll let you know. Thank you so much, Lawrence. Take care.